Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll be done. Apparently, I still have a mic on. Is that helpful? Yes? Okay, good. Thanks so much for being here. This is going to be far less formal than what just happened. I would love for you to be able to ask questions and feel free to interact in whatever ways. If there's things that came up from the message that come to mind as we're talking through this. What I want to do basically in the next hour is go through a mini version of a workshop that we offer as a full day experience with Food for the Hungry. And the whole goal of this is to really think about what is poverty. And so I do have a PowerPoint presentation, and so my friend at the back there is going to move slides through, but he doesn't know exactly when I want him to change them, so I'm just going to wave, or I'm going to say now please or something. So if you want to just switch it to that next slide, I am curious, when you think about finishing this sentence, what do you think poverty is? How would you finish that sentence? Not enough food. Yeah, not enough. Comes to mind, doesn't it? Yeah. What else?
Lack of resources.
Okay.
Like uncertainty or worry.
Okay. Uncertainty or worry about where food or where things are going to come from for you. Yep.
Lack of options.
Lack of options. Yeah, for sure. I heard things that are unfair. It feels unfair. Yeah, poverty is unfair. Inequality. Okay. Yeah. So I want to start by just telling you a little story. It's probably over 2 years ago now. My husband went down into our basement, and there was a little puddle of water on the floor. And he looked around, and we have a little fridge down there, and the fridge didn't appear to be leaking, and I hadn't started defrosting everything, so there wasn't a logical answer for why there would be a puddle of water on the floor. And so he did the next natural thing, and he went like this. And sure enough, there's this spot in the ceiling where this drip of water is coming down. And in that moment, he had some options, didn't he? What would be some of the options that he could do at that point?
Go upstairs and watch the hockey game.
Exactly. Not my problem. I'm just going to go and do something that's much more enjoyable for me. Yeah? He could have also pulled out his favorite roll of duct tape and just taped the ceiling and hoped that the problem would go away. But thankfully, what he did do is he went upstairs, but he went into the bathroom that's right above that area, and he realized that there was a pipe that was leaking underneath the bathroom sink. And then he did the next really great thing. He called a plumber, and he didn't try to fix it himself. And the plumber came in, and he repaired the pipe, and now there was no longer a problem in the basement. So if you look at this next slide, what we like to think about when we're talking about poverty, but also applies to many, many things in life, is how we define a problem is going to determine how we solve that problem. And if Bill had defined that problem as there's something wrong with the ceiling, then his solution was going to look very different. So how we define poverty matters. Because if we're going to solve the issue of poverty, we need to know what the root cause is, and we need to know what the root problem is. So on the next slide, you'll see a picture of a couple of gentlemen. One is a staff member of ours. His name is Leaky, and this is in Cambodia. And I know it's unfortunate that I'm telling you a story about a water leak, and then this gentleman's name is Leaky. However, there is no connection there. It just occurred to me right now. So Leaky is a staff member who has worked in this community, and they had a huge issue in this village with malaria. And so when our staff started walking with this particular community, one of the things that the leaders said was, we would really like to address this issue of malaria because it's not just making us sick, it's keeping us from work, it's killing us at times, our children are really in trouble. And we have these nets that were given to us by another NGO that brought them in, dropped them off. And so we just feel like we don't understand why, since we've gotten these nets, we actually have more cases of malaria than we did before we got the nets. And so are we using them wrong? Like, are we not setting them up properly? What is happening? So our staff, as they do, lived in the community. And they watched, and they got to know people, and they observed. And these creative, problem-solving human beings had received these nets and thought, well, they've got to be good for more than just at night. We could catch a whole lot more fish with these nets if we use them by day. Well, when you're using a fishing net or a net like that for fishing, where are you fishing? Right by the shore, right where all the mosquito larvae is. And so by day, they're scooping up fish and mosquito larvae, and by night, they're putting them over their beds, and the mosquitoes are inside the nets with them. How you solve that problem needs to be connected to what you determine the problem is. So more malaria medication was not the answer. It was actually a really simple solution. And the solution was, once you've used the nets by day, because keep doing that, that's brilliant, wash them out. And let us show you, we'll work together on how you clean them so you can make sure they're clean. The malaria cases dropped radically after that was figured out. What's the root cause of the problem? So I want to show you a short video. It's actually created by an organization in the States called the Chalmers Center. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Brian Fickert. He is someone who has written a book called When Helping Hurts. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it, especially if you're involved in life in general. It's a great way to inform how we interact even with our children and our adult children and our family members, not just somebody else that we would see as someone we are helping. If you want to play that video, thank you.
How can giving food to someone who is hungry actually hurt them? Before we answer that, we need to look at how we define poverty. Many people define it as a simple lack of material things, not enough food, money, clean water, medicine, or housing. But when you ask the materially poor to define poverty, you'll hear things like, I feel inferior, I feel ashamed, I feel powerless, I feel less than human, I feel like I cannot change my life. These feelings of shame, inferiority, and powerlessness are only made worse when we give handouts of food and clothing to them. No father's dignity is restored by seeing people providing things to his kids, things that he was unable to provide on his own. Poverty goes beyond the material and cuts to the core of how they view themselves, psychologically and socially. We often misdiagnose the problem or treat the symptoms instead of the underlying illness, and our help can actually be harmful, preventing them from getting better. That's when helping hurts. But the truth is, we are all poor. Everyone. We are all in need, because we all experience brokenness in the 4 fundamental relationships of life. Our relationship with God, self, others, and the rest of creation. These relationships are the building blocks of life. It starts with our relationship with God, the one from which the other 3 flow. Our relationship with self. We are created in God's image and have a high calling to reflect God's glory. Our relationship with others. We are made to love one another, know one another, and encourage one another to follow God's calling. And our relationship with creation. God created us to be stewards, to manage the world and sustain ourselves. But because of the fall, sin entered the world, and all 4 relationships were broken. Our intimacy with God was replaced by a fear of God. Our relationship with self went from a sense of dignity to feelings of shame. Our relationship with others went from community to conflict. And our relationship with creation went from joyful work to toilsome labor. Everyone suffers from the effects of these broken relationships. So we are all impoverished in the sense of not experiencing these relationships as God intended. It may not always look the same across the world, but we all share the same desperate need for Christ, who offers hope that what is broken, both inside us and around us, will be restored. Yes, sometimes we do need to provide food to people, but poverty alleviation is so much more than that. It involves reconciling the broken relationships at the root of poverty. It means taking the hungry person by the hand and saying, "I'm hungry too, but I've found the bread of life. He can provide the lasting help that you and I both need." Until our view of poverty changes, any help we offer is likely to do more harm than good.
What stands out to you from that short video? There's a lot covered in there. How poverty makes us feel. Yeah, that's not something we often talk about, is it? We talk about what people don't have, but not what it feels like. Yeah. Thank you. What else? Is there anything new in there for you? Anything that you're kind of going, hadn't thought about that? The dignity piece. When that broken relationship happened, we lost our sense of dignity. Yeah. Yes?
That poverty is a lot more relationally based than material.
Okay. If you want to flip 2 more slides there, then that will take us right, or sorry, just one more. Yeah, there we go. Poverty starts with broken relationships. So, just like the example I gave you of our basement ceiling leaking, we need to know that the solutions we're applying are actually connected to the problem. So, if we are agreeing that the beginning of poverty happened when these 4 key relationships were broken because sin entered in, then our solutions to poverty need to be relationally based. So are you all familiar with the Gathering Market that operates here out of your church? That is a beautiful expression of people understanding that it isn't just about food. It's about an opportunity for people to come to a safe place where their dignity is preserved, so they're not handed things that they don't want or don't like or are allergic to or whatever. There's choice involved. They have an opportunity to come and to connect with other volunteers who are there and with other shoppers. Because a lot of times people are in isolation and they don't know how to reach out, and they maybe are so overwhelmed by their circumstances or possibly even feeling ashamed of their circumstances. And this beautiful, cheerful, lovely space gives an opportunity for people to connect relationally. And that's when poverty begins to be addressed. And that's why we do the work at Food for the Hungry the way we do. Our people, and I think I mentioned earlier in the service that 98% of our staff are working in the countries they were born in. And so they're living in communities with people they know and who know them, and it begins with relationship. So when we're thinking about how do we address issues of poverty right here in Canada, what do you think is the first thing we need to do?
Know our neighbors.
Know our neighbors. Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think might prevent us from taking a relational approach to addressing issues of poverty? What keeps us from doing that? Sure does. Takes time. What else? Our own poverty. You want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we're all broken, right?
We are.
And
So he's saying, if you can't hear, that we're all broken and that we need to solve the problem within before we start looking to try and solve problems without. Sure. So there's fear. There's fear. And it's really messy. Like, I know how messy my life is. I'm not sure I want to get involved in yours because at least I know my mess. I'm familiar with my mess, but your mess scares me a little bit. And what if I can't do anything for you? But that's the whole point. It's not about that, right? We think of Elisha and the widow. It's not about what I can do for you. It's, am I willing to be with you? Am I willing to use that theological imagination to help you consider what assets you have and how you might actually make changes for yourself? That all sounds really neat and tidy. It's not. It's very messy. It's very involved. It's very time consuming. It's exhausting. We have to have healthy boundaries so we know when we should say yes and when we shouldn't say yes. And so there's a lot demanded of us. So sometimes it's easier to write a check and say, I've done my part. To be 100% clear, we love your checks. We are happy with people who write checks. And there are times where that is what we can do, and that is how we can participate. The question then becomes, is it a time where you can do that or something other than that? Because sometimes we can't write checks. Sometimes we don't have an opportunity or an option to do that. So what are the ways that we can consider that relational connection? So if you don't mind going to the next slide, I want to just think for a minute, just to kind of build on this recognition that if we're saying poverty begins with broken relationships, and that with God, self, others, and creation, then what forms of poverty do we actually see that we can connect back to those broken relationships? Because I find that this actually really helps when people can say, okay, no, that's not the issue. That's just the symptom, actually. So what do you think might be a form of poverty, keeping in mind that all forms of poverty really come from a broken relationship with God? But specifically, what might we see in ourselves and in others that would indicate a broken relationship with God?
Dysfunctional families.
Okay, dysfunctional families, yep. What else?
I think of Adam and Eve and this story of doing what was best in their eyes in a way that subverted God's goodness that he had, and so a broken relationship with God, I think, creates greed, which leads to there's an abundance in our world, and many of the 1% or people and higher up have more than enough, and then there's many without. And
Right.
I can see how that connects to, in our own eyes, doing what self-serves us best.
Sure.
Make sure we're covered.
Yep. So going all the way back to Adam and Eve and that self-serving, that choosing what is best for me, and then also just recognizing the impact that has in terms of greed and the inequality in terms of wealth distribution around the world. Anything else come to mind? Isolation. Okay, that hiding, that shame, where Adam and Eve walked freely in the garden and related with God, then they went and hid, didn't they? And they were isolated. They were apart from. How about a broken relationship with ourselves? Where do you see evidence of that? Shame. I heard shame somewhere. Yep. What else? That the lack of self-confidence. Yeah. Our self-esteem. Our sense of self-worth. all of those pieces. And sometimes that shows up in things like addiction and broken understanding of who we are and who we were created to be. How about others? What do you see in terms of evidence of that broken relationship?
The relationship with others and being isolated by yourself.
Sure. So, yeah, a lack of relationship with others, that isolation piece again, being on your own. Yep. What else? Judgmental. Being judgmental. Yes. I wouldn't know anything about that, actually. Just talking about other people. Of course we're talking about other people. Yes. Yes. All these things apply only to other people. Yeah. We see that in terms of, like you mentioned, family dysfunction, broken relationships in families, in so many different ways. You look at many of the reasons that the communities that we walk with internationally are in the positions that they're in, it's because other people are creating systems that are so unjust that there's no way they can possibly get ahead. We have injustice that happens all the time in Canada. Happens right in our own neighborhoods. So those ones are often the most easy to see, I think. And then what forms of poverty do we see with our broken relationship with the created world?
That it's just something for us to use as opposed to something that is its own entity that we respect.
That we see it as something that's to be used or consumed for our enjoyment as opposed to the respect of it as an entity of its own. Yeah. And what are some practical expressions of this poverty? How does it look? Pollution, absolutely. Yep. Where are garbage dumps typically located in a city? Pardon? Close to water? Poorer sections of town. Which came first, the poorer section or the garbage dump? Right? Where can you afford to live? What happens to land values? And then what are other things that you're potentially in danger of if you are living close to a dump that has toxic waste in it, that's close to water, that's close to your... And it all becomes this very complicated mess. And that's why there is no one answer to addressing poverty. But we need to spend time thinking about, where does poverty begin? What are the root causes of poverty? And so whenever you encounter something or someone and you say, okay, that's a situation of poverty, I would encourage you to ask yourself, what broken relationship does that connect back to? Because that's how we're going to find out where we have solutions and where the solutions need to come from. So I want to show you another short video here. And keep in mind that this version that we're going through right now, when we do this in a whole day, we spend a whole lot more time talking about all of these different areas, but this is just kind of like a trailer for you. So hopefully doing a longer one some other time. But this video, I really appreciate it. It's an older one now, and I understand the irony of the fact that it is actually sponsored by Rolex, and she's talking about poverty. However, some of the things that she says are just so powerful because she grew up in a church environment, and a lot of the beliefs that she holds, I think, are things that we, within the church context, often also believe or feel to be true. The other thing I would just say as a preface to this is, prior to, I would say maybe the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of times we would refer to people as the poor, and that really essentializes people when we talk about them like that, as if that is the whole of who they are. And so I don't really like that she does that in this. It's more appropriate to speak of someone who is experiencing something rather than that they are that thing. I am experiencing aging. I am not old, that kind of thing. So let's have a watch and see if you can find yourself anywhere in this. Did I hear ancient out there? Is she going to talk to us?
The stories we tell about each other matter very much. The stories we tell ourselves about our own lives matter. And most of all, I think the way that we participate in each other's stories is of deep importance. I was 6 years old when I first heard stories about the poor. Now, I didn't hear those stories from the poor themselves. I heard them from my Sunday school teacher and Jesus, kind of by my Sunday school teacher. I remember learning that people who were poor needed something material, food, clothing, shelter, that they didn't have. And I also was taught, coupled with that it was my job, this classroom full of 5 and 6 year old children, it was our job, apparently, to help. This is what Jesus asked of us, and that he said, what you do for the least of these, you do for me. Now, I was pretty psyched. I was very eager to be useful in the world. I think we all have that feeling. And also it was kind of interesting that God needed help. That was news to me, and it felt like it was a very important thing to get to participate in. But I also learned very soon thereafter that Jesus also said, and I'm paraphrasing, the poor would always be with us. This frustrated and confused me. I felt like I had been just given a homework assignment that I had to do, and I was excited to do, but no matter what I would do, I would fail. So I felt confused, a little bit frustrated and angry, like maybe I'd misunderstood something here, and I felt overwhelmed. And for the first time, I began to fear this group of people and to feel negative emotion towards a whole group of people. I imagined in my head a kind of long line of individuals that were never going away, that would always be with us. They were always going to ask me to help them and give them things, which I was excited to do, but I didn't know how it was going to work. And I didn't know what would happen when I ran out of things to give, and especially if the problem was never going away. In the years following, the other stories I heard about the poor growing up were no more positive. For example, I saw pictures and images frequently of sadness and suffering. I heard about things that were going wrong in the lives of the poor. I heard about disease. I heard about war. They always seemed to be kind of related. And in general, I got this sort of idea that the poor in the world, lived lives that were wrought with suffering and sadness, devastation, hopelessness. And after a while, I developed what I think many of us do, this predictable response, where I started to feel bad every time I heard about them. I started to feel guilty for my own relative wealth, because I wasn't doing more, apparently, to make things better. And I even felt a sense of shame because of that. And so, naturally, I started to distance myself. I stopped listening to their stories quite as closely as I had before, and I stopped expecting things to really change. Now, I still gave. On the outside, it looked like I was still quite involved. I gave of my time and my money. I gave when solutions were on sale. Cost of a cup of coffee can save a child's life, right? I mean, who can argue with that? I gave when I was cornered, when it was difficult to avoid. And I gave, in general, when the negative emotions build up enough that I gave to relieve my own suffering, not someone else's. But truth be told, I was giving out of that place, not out of a genuine place of hope and excitement to help and of generosity. It became a transaction for me, it became sort of a trade. I was purchasing something, I was buying my right to go on with my day and not necessarily be bothered by this bad news. And I think the way that we go through that sometimes can, first of all, disembody a group of people, individuals out there in the world, and it can also turn into a commodity, which is a very scary thing. So as I did this, and as I think many of us do this, we kind of buy our distance, we buy our right to go on with our day. I think that exchange can actually get in the way of the very thing that we want most. It can get in the way of our desire to really be meaningful and useful in another person's life, and in short, to love.
So, what did you notice in that? Did you see yourself in there anywhere? Is there anything you could relate to? Everything. Okay. One of those, oh my, that hits hard. Yeah. Others? Guilt. Who said guilt? Oh, yeah. Guilt about anything in particular? That you're not doing enough. Yep. That's something that should be doing more. Yep. That's a common response. Because the need is so huge, and I have so much. I should be doing more. Those with a lot of money should give more? Well, I can't argue with that, but but what does that do then? What kind of a perspective does that set up?
Money can solve it.
That money can solve the issues, right? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with giving money. Organizations flourish because generous people give money. What else might be required of us beyond money? Because maybe money isn't the answers. Yes? A new perspective.
Instead of trying to negatively reinforce something, to try to positively reinforce it. So you said the word flourish. So how can things flourish? How can we bring that about?
Yeah.
How can we be a participant?
Right. So instead of negatively, what was the word you used? Reinforcing something, positively looking for new ways and other ways that things can be done. Yeah. What else stood out to you in that? Because she says a lot in a short period of time. Being transactional. Yes.
You're giving money to sort of feel better sometimes.
Yeah.
In the same sense of like guilt and stuff.
Yeah. It becomes a transaction. I am giving so that my guilt can be reduced. So it actually isn't about other people at all. It's about my guilt being reduced. And then what's missing in all of that is that relational connection, that love, that desire to love and to care. What else?
I think the self-centering in it, that as we try to do things. Last Sunday we talked, Christine preached on Jesus' words on praying in secret and those kind of things and the heart's intent behind things. And I think the idea of talking about giving, then it instantly becoming about how it makes me feel and what I can do. It's important to process things ourselves, but it's similar if you go on a missions trip and then the stories back are just how awesome it was for you, which
Right.
is good. It's important for you to experience something positively, but we can just make ourselves the heroes of the story sometimes, or the center of the story, even in how we're trying to help other people, which is a challenge.
Absolutely. And when you talk about trips, I think those planning trips have a really big responsibility to ask, why are we even doing this? Have we been invited? Has the group that we're going to visit, do they want us there? And have they come up with what tasks we might be doing? And one of the things that we do at Food for the Hungry is we have what we call vision and partner trips. And the partner trips are with families, businesses, churches who partner with a particular community. And when a trip happens, the sole purpose of going is to build relationship with that community. Drives Canadians nuts. They cannot wrap their head around why we would do that. And then over time, because we partner for approximately 10 years, when they're into their third and fourth and fifth trip, they start to realize this is why we're doing it, because we are actually changing. And we thought we were going to help other people change. And then there often will come a point where the community members will say, we have relationship with you now, we trust you, we know who you are, and we know what skills you have, so could you come and help us build a school? Totally different than, hey, we think you need a school, we're going to come and build one for you. So that's where this kind of discussion and this kind of thinking becomes so tangible and practical. And especially when we're thinking about church ministry. How are we creating the ministries that we do? And we will never, as human beings, be able to fully separate ourselves from, well, it's good for me, right? I feel good about doing this because, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's the center of our motivation, then we need to have a look at that. Anything else from what she had to say?
Organizations sometimes maybe do themselves a disservice if they're not showing people, with dignity, if they're always showing the starving, fly-faced little children.
Absolutely.
Start to feel like I give so much money and nothing happens, but when
Yeah.
you see people portrayed with dignity,
Yes.
that there's hope, then it can be easier to give to say, I want to build on that hope rather than
Yeah.
always sort of it's called, I think, kind of pornography. What is that, poverty pornography?
Poverty pornography, yeah.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
so agencies, it also depends on how they are portraying what's happening with those dollars.
Absolutely. And just so you know, could you all hear what she was saying? So that agencies do themselves a disservice with how they portray people who are living in extreme material poverty by, the distended stomachs and the flies all over the face and all that kind of thing, then as opposed to people who are showing hope and resilience and being, inviting people into that story rather than feeling like, well, this is still the way it is, then what's the hope in actually even participating? There's actually a really big movement within NGOs now to get rid of that whole way of storytelling. So one of the things, this is really a sidebar here, but you bring up a great point, and a lot of times people ask these kind of questions. When we travel, I have people who, I had a team of Canadians with me, and they, of course, they wanted to take lots of pictures. And we actually have a policy that you cannot take a picture and post a picture of any child in any community that we're in. And it's really hard for people to wrap their head around because these kids are cute. And they're connecting with them and they want to. Unless that child is with a parent and the parent gives consent, those pictures cannot be taken. And why is that? It's because we're preserving the dignity of human beings. This is not this is not poverty tourism that we're talking about here. And so we need to ask these really hard questions about why we do the things we do. And so as a sector, we are very much looking at those kind of things to say we need to make sure we maintain the dignity of the people that we work with. So if you could switch to the next slide there, please. This is a quote. There should be a quote. There it is. There's the quote. From the book I was referring to, When Helping Hurts. One of the biggest mistakes that North American churches make by far is applying relief in situations in which rehabilitation or development is the appropriate intervention. So, if you don't mind switching to the next one there, please, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say relief. Now, if you caught it in the sermon this morning, I referred to relief happening when one widow was, the oil just kept flowing, right, until the famine and all of the drought was finished. And there was relief given. So relief is that intervention that happens when there is a crisis that will cause damage or even death to somebody if they don't get help right away. Now, that quote about one of the biggest mistakes that North American churches make is that we apply relief when something else is required. So what that really means, in short, is we keep handing out stuff. We keep giving people things as opposed to investing in the relationship to walk with people and be alongside to see those kind of other kinds of changes take place. So when we're talking about rehabilitation, so let's say, for example, it's a situation where there is a a natural disaster. That's what I'm looking for. Sorry, this is periodically feeling like it's choking me just a little bit. So, a natural disaster. How many of you recall, I would imagine most of you, if not all of you, recall the flooding of a couple years ago, 2.5 years ago? So in that day, when the waters just came through and there was this massive flooding in the Sumas Prairie, our home, which is about 2 minutes that way, our basement actually flooded as well. And the amount of rain, we just could not, the drainage just couldn't handle it, and so our basement flooded. Tricky part was that my husband and I were in Manitoba because the day our house flooded was also the day that my father died. So we're several provinces away. We have somebody who, by the grace of God, stopped in and checked our home on that day, stepped down into the basement and was ankle deep in water. And so they phoned us and said, your basement's flooding. And then we had 6 other people who went there immediately with their wet vacs and just started taking water out. And because of that relief, because of that immediate intervention and help, our basement was, our contents in our basement were largely spared. We still had thousands of dollars worth of damage and had to rip off drywall and flooring and all the rest, but they were able to keep the water from getting too high, and they were able to move contents to a safe place. Our next door neighbors, who had nobody home at the time and didn't know that the house was flooding, ended up with 3 feet of water in their basement. So those people who helped us in that immediate time, they don't come to our house still every day to see if we're okay 2.5 years later. They don't come in and check our basement on a routine schedule. That was a one-off kind of thing. And then when we got to another point where we needed to move some things, then some of them would come back and they would help, but it would be for a short time. And they would check in and they would say, how are you doing? And is there anything that we can help you with? But we were responsible for saying, we need to take charge of this. And now we're here, and yes, there's a lot going on, and we really appreciate your support. But it wasn't other people doing it for us. It was them coming alongside and offering to do it with us as we deemed necessary. That's relief, rehabilitation, and development. When you're talking about a person who's in a crisis, maybe there is a death in the family, it's totally appropriate to take those people some meals. But if you're still taking meals and driving their kids to school and doing their grocery shopping 2 or 3 or 4 years later, you may want to ask yourself, is this actually really my responsibility? Or am I actually removing some dignity from this person for them to be able to do these things for themselves? And how might I better walk alongside them to encourage them, to encourage their skills and their confidence to grow so that they can do it for themselves? I often think of how God has given us backpacks that we're all supposed to carry. And those are some basic essential things that we're supposed to do for ourselves in life. And so we can be carrying on through life with our backpack on, and then all of a sudden we get hit with a boulder. And for a while it's okay for somebody to carry that backpack for me, but eventually I need to take that backpack back. So my question to you today is, how are your shoulders? Are you carrying too many other people's backpacks? Because this isn't just an international conversation. This is what's happening in my own family kind of conversation. Am I allowing people the dignity of walking on their own and carrying their own responsibilities in life? So, any questions about that? How does that strike you? The responses. Can any of you think of an example? Oh yeah, go ahead.
So, nearly on a weekly basis, because of my role in the office, I get calls or people come in and they need immediate help.
Mm-hmm.
At least
Right.
So I experience a lot of frustration because I can do the immediate relief.
Mm-hmm.
I can pay for their hotel room because otherwise them and their family will be on the street
Mm-hmm.
that night. But I don't think is that the right thing? Is that the right thing to do
Mm-hmm.
with the church's resources?
Yep.
And if not, then what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
I actually
Have I got a course for you? In all seriousness, yeah, one of the things that we do through FH is take people through, and particularly churches, through a course called Helping with Church Benevolence. And so that whole, because those principles are absolutely what needs to apply here. And when you have somebody who comes in and says, I have this immediate need and I can't, whatever the circumstances, you have no way of knowing whether they've been to 9 other churches this month and you're just on a list of churches that word gets out that, yeah, if you go there, you can get this, that, or the other thing. It's possible. It happens. So then what are some better ways? Do you have a team that you can call on to say, hey, this person is in the office. Can you come in right now and have a coffee with them and just get to know them? Because you can't do that all by yourself. Do you have people that you can call on to make those kind of connections? Do you have even some forms that people fill out so that you know for sure that you have their name and you have contact information and you've captured some of their story, so you have some history? So some of those, we could probably spend hours talking specifically, but it's a really important question because we're actually harming people if we're allowing them to perpetuate a cycle of getting a handout here and a handout there and a handout there. Of course not. No, of course not. And it might be that if you put some of these things in place, they may never come back to your church. But if they encounter that same kind of actual love of Jesus that has some lines in the sand, maybe somewhere down the line it will start to make sense because maybe somebody will have that relational connection with them, and you'll probably have some people be very angry with you. That doesn't mean what you're doing is wrong. Because a lot of times people don't know that they can take up their own lives. They don't, really, path of least resistance, right? If I can get somebody else to do it for me, why would I do it myself? So then we have to ask ourselves, are we being part of the solution or are we actually being part of the problem? We have another video that we show in the full day of this workshop, and I believe the stat that they give is something like 75 encounters are required before a person who is experiencing homelessness or is stuck in extreme circumstances begins to trust another person. 75. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, Leslie, it kind of reflects on our church a little bit, because I think your key word there is time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we as a church aren't willing to give time to something, then we are stuck with that kind of charity that you're saying. And I think if I see someone on the street and they're asking for $1 or $1, $10, whatever.
It's probably $10 now. Yeah.
Either I have an option. I can give them $10 and spend no time with them, or I spend time with them and try to figure out a better solution. And I think what you're talking is about, as a church, we are only spending, we aren't willing to give that time investment. And so until we're willing to give a time investment, I think we have sort of a handicap.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Because it does take time. And it takes that investment in people rather than just here, have this, get out, go on out the door. So I have permission to tell you this story from my husband. when I first started working at Food for the Hungry, we were having all kinds of discussions like this because there was all these things that we had been doing and giving to, and we were reevaluating everything and saying, oh my goodness, what are we doing? This is not good, and we need to. So he went to Superstore one day, and there was this gentleman sitting just outside the stairs, and so Bill thought, I am going to buy him some food. I am not going to just hand him money and walk away. I'm going to buy him some food, I'm going to bring it out, and I'm going to have a conversation with him. So in he goes with his great intentions. And he goes to the bulk aisle and he buys a bag of trail mix because he thinks now there's protein in there. He's going to get all kinds of really good, healthy things with that. So he's got his big bag of trail mix. He comes out and he's feeling pretty good about himself at this point. And he would tell you that. And so he stops and he says, hey, I saw that you have some need and I just wanted you to know that I bought this for you. And so this guy looks up at him with this completely toothless smile and says, thank you, man, but I don't have any teeth. Take it home to your family. And Bill came home and he was just like, if I had taken time initially to have a conversation with this guy, I would have known very quickly that he had no teeth and that trail mix was a ridiculous thing to buy for him. But even more than that, I could have said to him, what would you like me to purchase? Or would you like to come in with me and I will purchase something for you? But it's that investment of time, right? And it's this mindset of, I have a better idea what somebody else needs than what they might think they need. Because when you get involved in these relationships, and you're walking with people and they start making some decisions, you're going to go at times, that's ridiculous. Like, why would they even want to do that? Because you think that you have a better idea. And in fact, you got to just take your hands off and say, they have an opportunity, they have the privilege of learning as they go too. And so maybe it will actually be something far better than we could have ever thought. Whether it is or it isn't, they get to choose. And then they get to live with the consequences of those choices, just like we do. And we have to be really careful that we don't do the Superman swoop in and try to protect people from feeling the consequences of their choices all the time. Because that's part of what can be this harming rather than helping cycle that we get into. We're coming close to the end of our time here. One of the things that we often talk, or we usually talk about in these workshops, is the very passage that I spoke on this morning, so we're not going to spend more time on that. But if you don't mind going just to the kind of close to the end of the slides, there is a slide there about the podcast that I have the privilege of hosting. It's called Ending Poverty Together Podcast. And we have guests from all over Canada and around the world who come, and it's just half an hour. It's a very casual kind of conversation, but they talk about, and we together talk about, really important topics. So if this is something that has tweaked your interest and you're feeling that sense of, I want to know more, I want to understand more about this, that's a great way. The podcast is a great way. It's free, it's easy to find, easy to listen to. I trust it's easy to listen to. I feel like I'm so blessed because I get to have all these amazing conversations with people. There's also, our website is Food for the Hungry. Our website is fhcanada.org. And so you're welcome to check anything out there if you're interested. And then I've left some pieces of information over there if you want to know more about FH. And if you want to talk specifically about the benevolence course, I'm happy to do that sometime too. Yeah?
Thank you very much, Shelaine. Let's just say thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tyrell, for also live streaming this. So we'll post a link in our newsletter. So if you want to watch this again or share it with others, we have it available as a resource now that we'll put the link in our Friday newsletter. So thank you very much for coming, and blessings on your week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.